The courtroom fell into a hush. The moment Gwen Stefani took the stand, she didn't walk in with the theatrics of a pop icon, no sunglasses, no entourage. No smirk, just a quiet confidence that didn't beg for attention, but commanded it. The jurors didn't blink. Even Diddy, seated at the defense table, shifted for the first time. All morning she was sworn and adjusted the mic and took a deep breath. Then she began. It was supposed to be just another Hollywood night. That's what I told myself when I got the invite. Her voice was steady, her expression unreadable. She said the invitation came through a mutual friend, someone in the fashion industry. It wasn't even Diddy who called her directly. It was his assistant, smooth and professional, telling her Diddy's throwing something intimate, just good vibes, great people come through. It wasn't uncommon in that world. Parties weren't really parties, they were networking traps, ego-feeding rituals, but that night that one felt different from the moment she stepped out of the car. The house was in hills, the kind that didn't show up on GPS, long driveway, 2 guards in suits, rented security, real ones. She wasn't even let in right away. They asked for ID. They scanned her, then a woman with a tablet checked her off a list. That was the first time I hesitated. Gwen said something about it felt more like clearance than invitation. Inside it was every bit as glamorous as you'd expect. Mood, lighting, crushed velvet, everything soft, jazz laced with hip-hop, waiters floating through with glasses of champagne and plates of food she couldn't pronounce. But what stood out most, she said, was how compartmentalized it all was. There were areas you could go and areas you absolutely could not. Before we dive deeper into this unforgettable video, make sure to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon. That way you'll never miss any new coming videos like this. Now let's get back to it. She said there was a hallway at the back of the house, roped off with a gold chain, not velvet, not decorative, real chain. No explanation. No one standing there, but somehow everyone knew. Not Takris it, she asked. Someone, an actor she recognized, what was back there. He just shrugged and said, "Don't worry about it, that's not for us." That phrase stuck with her, not for us. She began to notice other things. Some of the women, young, stunning, dressed for something more than a party, were being ushered into rooms and never seen again. There were men huddled around small tables speaking, low guarded, and then there was the glass room. She didn't even mean to look past it. She was just following the art on the wall when she looked left and saw it floor to ceiling, glass tinted, but not fully. Inside, 6 women sat silently on a couch back. Straight eyes lowered. Eamon stood near them, not watching, guarding. They didn't look drunk, they didn't look happy, they looked placed. Gwen said, her voice tightening. She asked someone, a booth room, a woman she didn't know, a stylist, maybe, she wasn't sure. Whispered to her, just stay in the main area, trust me. At that point, Gwen said, the energy of the party shifted. For her, it no longer felt like a high society gathering, it felt like a performance with an invisible script and roles she hadn't agreed to play. And then she remembered the exact moment. The room didn't shear, but it reacted like something had changed in the air. People straightened up, the music changed, conversations paused mid-sentence. And he didn't smile, he just scanned the room like a man inspecting his property. He walked in like he owned the people, not just the house. She said that was the moment she knew something was wrong, and yet she stayed, because in that world, walking out too soon could make a story, and in Diddy's world, being a story could get you erased. What she didn't know then was that the night was far from over, and what she'd see next would haunt her far beyond that velvet shine. The night moved like slow poison. Gwen stayed in the main area, just like a woman warned her, but every second felt heavier than the last. She described the sensation clearly, like walking through a dream. You couldn't wake up from where everyone was smiling, laughing, sipping from delicate glasses, but under the surface, something was decaying. Diddy made his rounds. Not in the way a host checks on guests, but like a general inspecting soldiers. He barely spoke, but people laughed before he finished his sentences. He snapped his fingers once, and 2 women disappeared with him through a side hallway. No one asked questions, no one followed. Gwen tried to blend in, sipping the same untouched drink, pretending she wasn't reading every movement around her. She said that's when she noticed another strange detail. Phones, not a single guest had one out, not even in their hands. When she reached for hers to text a friend, Eamon, in a black shirt, immediately approached her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We keep things private to her," he said, extending his hand. She gave him the phone without thinking. "That's When it became real, this wasn't a party, this was control, this was theater with locked exits and unwritten rules, and then she saw her a young woman. Maybe 19, maybe younger, walked out from a hallway Gwen hadn't noticed before her dress was too short. Too sheer, and her face didn't belong there, not because she wasn't beautiful, but because she looked terrified, lost her makeup wastu perfect, her hair styled like she was being presented. She was led by another woman, older, confident, holding her arm just above the elbow like a handler. Gwen tried not to stare, but the girl glanced up just once and their eyes met. That 1 second changed everything. She wasn't I. Gwen said in court, she wasn't drunk, she was awake, completely awake and scared. She watched as the girl was taken toward the back of the house, past the gold chain, past the curtain. Gone. The air inside the house suddenly felt colder. Gwen turned back toward the main area, but something inside her shifted. It wasn't guilt yet, it was confusion, aspirating question. Why would a girl like that be here? She wandered back into the corner of the room with the artwork, the hallway where she'd accidentally seen the glass room before, but this time the glass was blacked out, no light. No visibility, like it had never existed. Gwen stood there for a while, pretending to study the wall, but in truth, she was listening for voices, movement, anything. That's when a man brushed past her and mumbled without looking at her, "If you didn't see anything, don't say anything." She turned, heart racing, but he was already gone into the crowd. That's when the panic set in, not fear for herself. Not yet, but the realization fate very on in that house, knew, maybe not the details, maybe not the full picture, but they all played their parts. The laughter, the dancing, the fake joy. It was a smoke screen for something else, something buried. She wanted to leave, but her phone was gone. She approached one of the guards near the front door and asked for it. He stared at her too long, then spoke into a walkie-talkie, then said, "Wait here, wait." That's when her body told her what her mind was too scared to say: "You are not safe." She turned around, tried to retrace her steps back to the room she came from, but the lights were lower now, music louder, people more spaced out. Her heels sounded too sharp on the marble. She felt like she was moving through a maze, and then Diddy appeared again. He didn't say a word to her, just looked at her eyes. Flat and readable, but the look said enough. It was the kind of look that didn't threaten, it reminded. "You were invited, you walked in, you stay quiet." She stood still, nodded, and walked straight toward the bar like she belonged, but inside she knew that was the last step. After that meant she'd be gone too. Another person who saw too much and said nothing, but not this time, not this party, not anymore. She didn't remember walking to the bar. Her feet moved, but her mind was somewhere else, stuck in that one glance locked on that girl's terrified face. She could still feel it, that split-second connection, that unspoken plea. Gwen had been in the industry long enough to know fake smiles from real fear in that girl's eyes. They were screaming. The bar was nearly empty now, a few stragglers swirling drinks, pretending not to notice the shift in energy. The bartender was expressionless, like he was trained not to ask questions. Gwen asked for water. He gave it to her in silence. No small talk, no acknowledgement. Just a glass and a nod, as if they both knew this wasn't a night for casual conversation. She sipped slowly, scanning the room. Diddy was gone. The curtain near the back still closed the hallway where the girl had vanished. Dark, the glass room still blacked out. It was like the house had swallowed every sign of what she had seen and sealed it shut. But then something strange happened. An older woman, maybe in her 50s, sat down beside her, elegant diamond earrings, perfect posture, not the type you'd expect to approach Gwen Stefani at a party. She didn't introduce herself, didn't compliment Gwen's dress. She simply leaned in and said, "You shouldn't stay much longer." Gwen turned to her, confused. Why? The woman smiled, said, "Knowing, because it's not a party after midnight, it becomes something else." Those words struck her like a punch to the gut. Not a party after midnight. What did that mean? She wanted to ask, but the woman was already gone, just like fat, like a ghost, as if she'd never been there. Gwen stood up and made her way back toward the entrance. She'd had no more than enough, but again the guard stopped her. "Your phone's still being processed." "Processed?" she asked. "It's a phone, not a passport." He didn't blink, just said, "It'll be returned when you leave." "I'm trying to leave." She snapped. The guard pressed his earpiece, listened to something, then gave a tight nod and stepped aside. Ass walked toward the door. She heard it, a noise she couldn't ignore, a shout, short, muffled, from the hallway near Therapeutic section. Not loud enough to cause a scene, but loud enough to feel Intentional like a warning or a slip, she turned toward it instinctively and for a moment. She saw something she was never supposed to see. The curtain was slightly open, and behind it was a staircase dimly lit leading down. She could only see a few steps, but what stood out wasn't the stairs, it was the shadow of a figure, a silhouette of someone. Being pulled, the curtain closed again. She froze, couldn't move, her body rooted in place by the weight of everything she was witnessing. Another woman came up behind her, placed a hand on her back, and whispered, "Don't make it worse for yourself." Gwen turned, but the woman was already walking away, and suddenly she realized this entire night wasn't disorganized or spontaneous. It was rehearsed, every look, every whisper, every person placed exactly where they needed to be. This wasn't chaos. It was choreography, the silence, the way no one flinched when girls vanished behind curtains, the way people smiled too hard. It was all part of a system, a design meant to keep everything smooth on the surface while something darker turned underneath. And then, just as she reached at the front door, a man stepped in front of her, not a guard, not staff, just a tall man in a velvet blazer. He didn't look angry, he looked careful. "You leaving already?" he asked casually. "Yes," she said, voice steady. He nodded, reached into his pocket and pulled out her phone. "They said you should have this back." She took it, hesitated, and asked, "Who's thee?" He smiled, "The ones who know," and then he stepped aside. She didn't run, she didn't cause a scene. She walked out slowly back into the cool night air, heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. She got in her car, locked the doors, and didn't look back. But that wasn't the end, because the next morning she got a message, no number, just text. "You saw too much, stay beautiful, stay quiet." That was the moment she realized, and they weren't just watching that night, they were still watching now. She stared at the message on her phone for what felt like hours. "You saw too much, stay beautiful, stay quiet." No Namino number, just those words, perfectly timed, perfectly placed, like a signature from a ghost. The kind of message that says more by saying less, the kind that doesn't threaten directly but reminds you of everything it knows. And Gwen knew exactly what it meant. She hadn't told anyone what she saw, she hadn't posted, hadn't whispered to a friend, hadn't even written it down. That message didn't come from a leak, it came from surveillance. Someone had watched her movements, her expressions, maybe even her thoughts. They knew what room she lingered in, they knew where her eyes went, they knew she noticed, and now they wanted her to forget. But she couldn't. Every second of that night lived in her head like a looping film reel. The hallway, the girth curtain, the voice that whispered, "It's not a party after midnight." It was all too real, too orchestrated, too evil to ignore. Gwen sat on the edge of her bedphone, still in hand, still unreadable to the outside world, to fans. She was just resting, maybe off the grid, maybe working on music, but inside she was unraveling. Not from panic, but from weight of decision. What do you do when you've seen something you can't prove, but know was real? What do you do? Silence protects you, and truth might destroy you. She started retrospectively face she saw that night, every voice, every strange detail that didn't make sense then, but screamed now. There were guests who barely spoke, just watched. Women dressed in matching color swow disappeared quietly into other wings of the house, security that was too strict for a party. And Diddy, how he floated between rooms like a man surveying property, not people she remembered. How everyone smiled, too wide-lawed, too hard, danced like their lives depended on it. And now she realized maybe they did that day. She candled everything. No shoots, no studio, no public appearances. She sat in her home with all the blinds closed, wondering how far their reach went. Wondering if anyone else had seen what she saw and lived to talk about if and something happened. 3 days later, another message came. No words this time, just a photo, not of her family, but of that same hallway inside Diddy's house, the one with the curtain. The photo was taken from the same angle she'd stood, and someone had been behind her watching her photographing. Her shed dropped the phone, her stomach twisted into something sharp and cold. This wasn't just a reminder, this was surveillance documentation, a way of saying, we were close enough to touch you on, we still are. But that moment, as terrifying as it was, gave her clarity. Best if they were trying that hard to silence her, that meant her voice mattered. So she made the call, not to Thepris, not to her publicist, to a former attorney she once worked with during a contract dispute years back. Someone who wasn't flashy, someone who understood power structures and how to move beneath them. She told him everything, every steep, every second of that night. She didn't embellish, She didn't need to. When she finished, he didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "I believe you, but if you talk they won't just attack your reputation, they'll bury it." She replied, "Then let them try," because Gwen wasn't just trying to protect herself anymore. She kept thinking about that girl, the one who looked at her from across the room, begging with her eyes for someone to see her, and now she had, and Gwen would rather burn every piece of her career than live knowing she let that girl disappear without a trace. So when the court subpoena came weeks later, she didn't hesitate. She stood in that courtroom, looked Diddy in the eyes, and begging to tell the story. No one thought she'd ever tell the one the music industry was never supposed to hear. Theon, they had threatened her to forget, and as the courtroom leaned in closer, Gwen made a silent promise to herself. She was done staying beautiful. She was done staying quiet. The courtroom was frozen. Everyone expected Gwen to be poised, to be composed, maybe even rehearse, but no one expected this level of calm, fireworks laced with precision but burning underneath with something raw. Not performance, not vengeance. Just truth finally unleashed. She looked directly at the jury now, not flinching, not backing away. "I know what you're all thinking," she said. "Why didn't I speak sooner? Why didn't I call the police? Why didn't I run out of that party screaming?" And the answer is simple: because I've lived in Hollywood for over 2 decades, know how power protects itself. I know how the industry covers its mess with money, glamour, and fear. And that night, I knew I'd walked into something much bigger than me. She described in detail how the house wasn't just a house, it was a machine built to absorb stories, erase memories, and break anyone who stepped too far outside the roles they'd been given. There were no security cameras, no traceable communications. Phones were confiscated under the guise of privacy, but really it was eraser. Every moment inside those walls was designed to disappear. But some things you can't forget, no matter how much they want you to. She remembered a woman in the kitchen, older eyes, tired voice, barely a whisper, asking Gwen if she wanted to stay long enough to be changed or leave before you're erased. At the time, it sounded cryptic, like poetry, but now it made terrifying sense. Gwen told the courthouse, spent days after that night trying to convince herself it hadn't been real. Fit. She imagined it, that the girl wasn't really scared, that maybe it was just another weird celebrity party with too many blurred lines, but the messages said otherwise. The photos said otherwise. Its silence from everyone who'd been there that night said otherwise. And then she dropped something the courtroom didn't expect. "I wasn't the only one at that party who saw it," she said. "There were others, names you'd recognize, faces seen on your screens, but they're not sitting here today, are they?" She took a beat, let the tension breathe. "You know why? Because they're afraid, because they saw what happened to people who speak, because they watched someone get blackballed just for asking the wrong question." She told the jury about a former stylist, someone she'd worked with briefly, who vanished from the industry after refusing to sign a non-disclosure agreement tied to a separate Diddy event. No public scandal, no lawsuit, just silence. One day she was on tour, the next teleted, every contract canceled, every relationship gone cold. "This machine to us must erase voices." Gwen said it erases lives. Her voice cracked slightly for the first time, and the courtroom leaned in. "I was one of the lucky ones. I got out before I became part of the system, but that girl didn't, and I haven't stopped thinking about her. I still don't know her name. I don't know where she went, but I remember her face, I remember her eyes, and I remember the exact second I knew if I stayed silent he'd be helping bury her story." She paused, "So I'm here to dig it back up." You could feel the air shift. Even Diddy's defense team stopped scribbling. They weren't just hearing allegations anymore, they were hearing a survivor dismantle the foundation of a world that had kept her quiet for years. Gwen leaned forward slightly and said, "One more thing. You can call me dramatic. You can say it's too late, but you can't say I'm lying, and you definitely can't say I didn't warn you." The courtroom was still every heartbeat louder than breath, because everyone knew the moment Gwen stepped off that stand, nothing in the industry would ever look the same again. And the silence that had once protected giants like Diddy, it was finally cracking. The judge hadn't said a word, not because he wasn't listening, but because Gwen Stefani's testimony had shifted the courtroom into sacred space, one where even legal formalities were momentarily outmatched by the weight of the truth being spoken. No one moved, no one dared, not even Diddy. Gwen sat forward now, hands clasped, tone lower but sharper. "I need to make something very clear," she said. "This isn't about one party, it's not about One night, what I saw, what I felt, was part of something designed to structure a machine. She explained that the party wasn't an exception, it was a template, a pattern that had been quietly duplicated across industry for years. Celebrities were invited, but they weren't really guests, they were distractions, shiny objects to draw attention away from the real transactions happening behind the velvet curtains. She recalled hearing about other parties whispered about in dressing rooms and studio trailers, events that everyone said were legendary but never posted about. No photos, no hashtags, just stories passed in hushed tones, stories that always included the same names, the same setups, and the same invisible rules you're not supposed to ask questions at those parties. She said you're supposed to be grateful you were invited. That's how they trap you, with access, with exclusivity. And once you're inside, you belong to the room. She described the psychological playbook, the way the lighting was manipulated, dim but seductive, the way the music shifted to match the energy of Diddy's movements. Way guests were separated not by status but by compliance. The ones who didn't ask questions were rewarded, the ones who did vanished. I watched people lost themselves in that house, she said, not physically, mentally, spiritually. You could see it in their faces that moment, when they realized they weren't there to party, they were there to serve. And Thench told the court about a second message she received weeks after the first. This one wasn't a threat, it was a warning. You've been seen. Not everyone wants you gone, but not everyone wants you safe either. She didn't recognize the number, couldn't trace it, but what haunted her more than the words was threatening. It came right after her name appeared on a leaked witness list. She hadn't told a soul she was testifying it. Her manager, not even her family, which meant someone in the system, the legal system, was feeding information to the outside. And if they could do that, what else were they capable of? That's when she started recording everything, every conversation, every visit, every late night knock on her door. She started building her own archive, knowing that if she went missing, someone would at least have a trail to follow. I've had to think about things most people never do. She said, what would I do if they tried to discredit me? How would I respond if I was suddenly accused of something insane? How would I protect my voice if they tried to flood the internet with noise to drown it out? She looked out across the courtroom. Now, not just at the jury, but at the public gallery, where other industry names sat quietly, trying not to be recognized. Let me ask you something, she said. Why do you think so many celebrities have stayed silent? Do you really think they didn't know, or do you think they were too terrified to be next? The silence in the room became suffocating. Then Gwen did something no one expected. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket, one she had brought with her, cleared by her legal team. She unfolded it slowly, placed it on the stand, and read aloud, "This is the guest list from that night, at least the part I remember. Some of these people are household names, some aren't, but every single one of them saw something, felt something, and if I can't sit here risking everything to tell you the truth, then they can too." She left the paper on the stand, not as evidence, as a dare, because she knew what would happen next. The denials, the media spin, the planted rumors, but she didn't care, because she wasn't here to survive the system anymore. She was here to break it brick by brick, name by name, party by party. And this courtroom, it was only the beginning. Gwen's voice didn't rise, but tension in the room did. The air was thick with everything unspoken, everything trembling just beneath the surface. Her folded paper lay on the stand like a ticking clock, dozens of names on it, each one a silent witness, each one now silently complicit. She didn't need to say it, but everyone knew what it meant. Their silence ends hearing. Then she dropped what would become the turning point of her entire testimony. She took a breath, not from exhaustion, but from restraint, and then she said it. I saw someone that night wasn't supposed to be there, someone young, too young. The courtroom went still. Even the court reporter paused before catching up with her words. I didn't know her name. I didn't recognize her at first, but when I saw her photos later on a gossip blog of all places, I realized who she was. A chilled actress, a familiar face in a world built to chew girls like her alive. She gripped sides of the witness stand, now steady, grounded. She wasn't dressed like a guest. She didn't walk like someone who chose to be there. She was being guided, no, managed by someone I now know was Diddy's assistant. And that's when everything clicked. Her voice dropped. This wasn't just a party, it was a pipeline. The courtroom gasped. She described how the girl was escorted behind the curtain, how she tried to stop thinking about it after that night, how she told herself it couldn't have been what it looked like. But then she saw the girl again, this time in a completely different Context: it was at an awards show 3 years later. Gwen was backstage walking toward her dressing room when she saw her again, the same girl, older but unmistakable, and the way she avoided Gwen's eyes. It wasn't coincidence, it was memory recognition, but also warning. That's when I knew she remembered me, tuned that she was still locked in it. Gwen said she tried to speak to her that night. She waited near the exit of Fechelway, but before she could reach her, a man intervened, one of Diddy's longtime security staff. He placed his hand on Gwen's shoulder and said one word, no, not, excuse me, not. She's busy, just no Ackerman, a reminder, a wall. That's the night I stopped pretending the industry was just flawed. I realized it was engineered to protect predators and punish witnesses. She said it was no longer about what happened at that one party. It was about a system designed to recycle silence, to bury girls and women beneath glamour, behind security and inside contracts that kill your voice. You think I'm the first woman to speak out? She asked the court. I'm not. I'm just the one still standing long and auto, say it in front of a judge. She talked about the fake empowerment campaigns, the panels, the hashtags. Carefully staged distractions to convince the public that the industry was healing, all while the real work covering up abuse, silencing women, and protecting the money never stopped. I was supposed to be a face for that fake change, Gwen said, but I walked off that set the day I realized they wanted me voice in quotes, not in truth. And then she did what no one expected. She named the girl first name only, clear, loud, defiant. The judge glanced at his clerk. Diddy's lawyer stiffened, but no one interrupted because now it was too late. The truth was out, the dots were connecting, and the story was no longer Gwen's alone. It belonged to every person in that room who had stayed silent. Every victim still hidden behind private settlements, and every girl who had ever been told to stay beautiful and stay quiet. She looked directly at Diddy. Now, you thought no one would speak because no one ever has. But the difference is, this time I didn't walk back out of that house and forget. I remembered everything, I kept everything, and I made sure I would live long enough to tell it. Her eyes didn't waver, and Diddy didn't blink, because in that moment the courtroom belonged to her. And the empire he built on silence, it was beginning to fall. Thessalence in the courtroom was no longer about shock, it was fear, the kind of fear that creeps in when power is finally cornered, when the truth becomes too vivid, too detailed, too undeniable. Toyner and Gwen Stefani, standing on that witness stand, didn't look afraid anymore. She looked free. Her voice softened, but her words landed like steel. I thought I was doing the right thing by staying quiet for years, I told myself. I didn't have the full story, that maybe it misunderstood, that maybe it wasn't my place. She paused, letting the guilt breathe through her chest. But silence is a choice, and I made the wrong one for too long, she told the court. How the girl, the underage celebrity she had recognized that night, had vanished from public life. Not long after, no official statement, no scandal, no announcement, just faded. One day she was on red carpets, smiling behind handlers, the next gone. I tried to reach out, Gwen said. I asked questions, quiet ones. I had friends in common, but every time I got close, themes was the same. Leave it alone. She recalled a meeting with a record executive months after the party, casual lunch, smiles, and industry gossip. But when Gwen brought up the girl, the tone changed instantly. The executive leaned in, voice low, and said, "Don't go digging in places Diddy's already buried." She said she laughed it off then, nervously, but it sat in her chest like a weight, something unmovable. I started realizing how many people knew, not just the guests, the staff, the stylists, the drivers, thelawires. Everyone had a piece of the puzzle. But nobody wanted to build the picture. Gwen described how behind the curtains of luxury and fame, a second industry existed, one built not on talent, but on manipulation, where loyalty was traded for protection, where speaking up didn't just get you canceled, it got you erased. And then she dropped the final bombshell. I have emails, she said. The Courtroom shifted. I have messages from people who were there, are people who reached out to me quietly after the headlines started swirling. Some just thanked me, some begged me not to say their names, but a few, they confirmed everything. She said one email came from a woman who used to work Diddy's parties. As a coordinator, her job was simple: organize the guest list, manage arrivals, and make sure the special rooms were staffed. She never asked what went on behind those doors. She was paid well not to, but in her message to Gwen, she wrote, "You were never supposed to see that girl. You were never supposed to hear the screams from the hallway. But you did, and so did I. Andy still hear them at night. That single sentence silenced the courtroom more than anything that came before it. I'm submitting these emails. Gwen said I'm willing to have them verified, investigated, scrutinized because another to play hero. I'm here to open the door I should have kicked open years ago. She took a breath, held it, and let it go. Slowly, I built my career on being bolden, wearing what I wanted, singing what I wanted, saying what I wanted, but in that house, I said nothing, and I've lived with that silence. For too long, she turned it back toward the judge, the jury, and finally the public gallery filled with faces both familiar and anonymous. I didn't expect forgiveness, I don't expect applause, but I do expect this story to finally live in daylight because that girl and so many others like her deserve a someone to say her name in a room like this. She looked back at Diddy, who sat frozen, unreadable, but noticeably still. You don't get to erase people forever, not with money, not with fear, and not with silence. The judge shifted forward in his chair. The stenographer's fingers moved, slowly capturing every word like a spell, and still no one dared interrupt because the truth Gwen unleashed wasn't just about one man, it was about a system and empire built on exploitation, insolence, and she was no longer a singer, a star, or a guest at a party. She was now the witness who cracked it open, and in this part of the story, Diddy wasn't the host anymore. He was the one being exposed. Gwen sat quietly for a moment, her hands still on the stand, but her voice no longer trembling. There was a kind of power in her now, not the fame-crafted glow of red carpets and sold-out arenas, but the power of finally telling the truth, and the room could feel it. Everyone could. It wasn't spectacle, it wasn't drama, it was exposure, cold, raw, real. I need you all to understand, she said, looking at the jury again. This wasn't about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. This was about being invited carefully to the exact place at the exact time. For Arison, she explained how she wasn't just another celebrity on the guest list. That night she had been selected, vetted. She didn't realize it then, but everything about that night had been choreographed. The driver who picked her up knew not to speak. The security check was a psychological boundary. The way she was introduced to guests, guided from person to person, room to room, wasn't natural. It was a dance, and she was supposed to play along, but I wasn't part of the club. She said, not the inner circle, not the ones will get the real invites. I was the outsider brought in to witness the surface, just enough to feel special, not now to see the core, and yet she did. She told the court how she now believeth the entire structure was a system of layers. The front glitz, champagne lauder music, the second, the whispers, the looks, the shadows, and then the basement. I never got to see what happened below that curtain, she said, but I didn't have to. I saw who went in, I saw what came out, and I saw who never came back. She paused, breathing through the memory. There was one woman. I never knew her name. I only saw her for maybe 10 minutes. She walked in through the back kitchen, escorted by 2 men in suits. She didn't look scared. She looked broken, like she'd already accepted whatever was waiting for her later. I asked where she went. One of the other women laughed, not out of humor, but survival and sage chase part of the inventory tonight. The courtroom gasped. One juror physically recoiled. Gwen's eyes burned, but she didn't cry. Inventory? She repeated like she wasn't even a person. That word haunted her for years. It came back to her every time she saw a new young woman disappear from the spotlight. Every time a rising star suddenly pulled back from fame with no explanation. Every time someone posted about mental health breaks and private healing, Gwen had started seeing the pattern. They don't disappear, they're disappeared. She said, by people who know how to clean up, how to pay off, how to scrub stories before they start. And then she revealed something that had been on her chest for nearly a decade. I signed an NDA once, she said, not for that night, but for something connected to the same circle. A deal I was offered to be part of a brand collective. It seemed like a business opportunity, but buried in the legal language was a clause, one that prevented me from speaking on events witnessed at closed private functions. At the time it seemed like standard language. Now she realized it had been a muzzle, a silencing tool used to protect the very thing she was testifying against. She looked at the judge. I broke that NDA by coming here. I understand the legal risk, but I also understand the moral one. Staying silent while women vanish, while men keep getting away with it, while the world claps for people who build their legacy on buried voices. She turned back to Diddy. You thought the system would protect you forever, but it only works until someone refuses to play along. Anthem softly, but with full clarity, she added, I'm not afraid of you. The entire courtroom held its breath because this wasn't just a testimony anymore, it was a dismantling. Brick by brick, name by name, lie by lie, and Gwen wasn't just delivering a story, she was delivering judgment, what they had built with velvet curtains. Celebrity shields and fear was no crumbling under one woman's truth, and Diddy, the man who had always controlled the room, now sat inside one. Could no longer escape. Gwen didn't look at her notes, she didn't check in with her attorney, she didn't need help finding her final words because the weight of what she'd just done, the name she'd spoken, the layers she'd exposed, silence she'd broken, had given her a kind of clarity. Most people never find it. Now she was standing inside that clarity. Not just as a witness to someone else's crimes, but as a survivor of an entire system built to disappear people like her. The world knows me as an artiste, said. They know the hits, the fashion, the headlines, but none of that protected the night. I left that house. Her voice was firm now, with the steady rhythm of someone who has nothing left to hide. I went home that night pretending nothing happened. I scrubbed it off my makeup, turned off my phone, and stared at myself in the mirror. I told myself it wasn't my place, that I didn't see enough, that I didn't know the full story. But the truth is, I knew what I saw, I felt what I felt, and I stayed silent, not because I was confused, but because I was afraid. She scanned the room, jurors, reporters, even the judge. No one blinked. I was afraid of losing what I'd built, afraid of headlines, of being the crazy one, afraid of being sued, blacklisted, erased, afraid that if I said Diddy's name, the machine behind him would come for me like it came for so many others. Then she nodded slowly. But here's what I finally understood. Silence does not protect you, it protects them. She talked about the culture of complicity, how the industry had spent years polishing the image of powerful men while hiding their rot. How NDAs were zed like bandages, how hush money became its own economy, and how people, real people, were chewed up and discarded in the name of empire building. I'm not the only one, she said. I'm just the one sitting here today, but there are more, so many more, and every time one of us speaks, the system shakes, not because they fear the words, but because they fear what comes after. She reached into her folder one last time and pulled out a final document she didn't read from it, simply said, "This is a signed statement from someone who was inside that basement, someone who came forward after I spoke up. She's not ready to be seen yet, but she exists, and she's not the only one." She handed it to the court clerk. "I'm submitting this as evidence, not because I want justice for myself. I'm here because someone once looked at me at that party and silently asked for help. I didn't help her then, but I will now, no matter what it cost me." And then, for the first time since she sat down, Gwen looked directly at Did not as a pop star to a mogul, but as a woman staring down the man who'd lived above consequences for far too long. "You built a fortress of fear," she said, "a world where people bowed to your power, but fear only lasts until one person stands up and says, 'No more, I'm that person today.'" She took a breath. It was the kind of breath you take when a storm finally breaks and the sky clears. It was over, and then she ended it with 6 words, not whispered, not shouted, just spoken clearly, finally, and with a hesitation. "You don't own silence anymore." The courtroom didn't erupt, it didn't eat. Too, because in that moment the truth had filled every inch of space. It couldn't be denied, it couldn't be contained, and it couldn't be buried again. Gwen stepped down. She walked past jury, past the attorneys, past the reporters. Not once did she look back, because there was nothing behind her worth fearing anymore, and ahead there was something bigger than justice waiting. There was change.